WayForward is a talented indie studio that has made a great name for itself delivering high-quality titles, with much of them set in a retro-like style. Their successful Shantae series is what most people know them for. These games started on the GBA and later were brought to modern consoles with impressive visuals. But WayForward has also worked on adaptations of other licenses. They worked with Universal for the Mummy spin-off of The Scorpion King. This side-scrolling action-adventure is seen as a hidden gem on the Game Boy Advance. But this wouldn't be the last time that WayForward would work with Universal. Universal was planning on a Mummy reboot along with a Dark Universe set of films that were all interconnected. While the rebooted Mummy is seen as a failure and a bad film, the movie tie-in adaptation by WayForward is an exceptional game that takes a lot of inspiration from Metroid and Castlevania. Join me as we take a look back at The Mummy Demastered. In 2002, the gaming publishing arm of Universal Studios approached the independent game studio WayForward to make a game based off their Mummy spin-off movie The Scorpion King. This would be an exclusive to the Game Boy Advance and also serve as a sequel to the film. WayForward had a history with working on Nintendo's prior handheld, the Game Boy Color, and were excited for this new opportunity. With this game set to release in 2002, that year WayForward would be releasing 3 games on the GBA. Their original IP Shantae, Godzilla Domination, and The Scorpion King. The Scorpion King project showed Universal that WayForward could take one of their existing licenses and make a quality game out of it. This was the start of a relationship between the publisher and developer, with them even working together on the portable Despicable Me adaptations. Years later, the movie arm of Universal was creating a reboot of their Mummy series, which would be the start of a set of films that would exist within the same universe. Universal then approached WayForward, presenting them the upcoming movie, what the parameters of the world were, and wanted them to make a game based on it. WayForward jumped at the opportunity to be involved in a new Mummy project, and felt that the Metroidvania genre would be the perfect fit for this game. The rough idea was to take the agents from the Mummy film and build the game around them as the heroes. The developers felt that this would provide them with more freedom as the game would exist alongside the film, rather than being a beat-for-beat recreation for the movie's events. The agents had an interesting backstory as they helped to keep evil at bay for centuries by studying and battling monsters. This resulted in WayForward accepting Universal's offer. They had their ideas and genre, and now it was time to make the game. At the start of the project, the team needs to figure out what abilities and upgrades the player will earn throughout the adventure. This is where the developers would iron out an idea of using a dash, long jump, climbing on the ceiling, and more. Next, the designers would figure out a rough layout of the map and decide where to place these abilities. It is here where important decisions are made and discussed, like what leads to those upgrades and how the abilities are used. The goal is to have a chain of upgrades that creates a path for the development team to follow. Then the team can determine what types of rooms to have, how big they should be, the sequences of enemies, and the secrets to hide. For example, should a vertical shaft contain enemies that the player would want to stop and fight, or something that they would be inclined to avoid? Another important element of the design was for the Mummy to have a good contrast between intense and calm areas. Having every area be intense would make the game exhausting, and keeping them too calm could cause boredom. There is a delicate balance in juggling these two elements to again contribute to that satisfying gameplay flow. WayForward planned on making making death to be a critical mechanic. They were planning on using what was featured in their Aliens Infestation game and expanding on it. In Aliens, the player would assume the role of a Marine, but if they die, that Marine would be permanently gone and the player would then go on to control an entirely different person. In The Mummy Demastered, the number of agents would not be limited, but rather each time you die, that agent would then turn into a zombie and would use the weapons that you had against you. The player would need to then fight their previous self to earn everything back. By featuring death in this manner, this means that failure is punished and places a considerable amount of weight on death itself. It enhances every action of the game by placing a significant level of consequence on your survival. Now, an agent can only equip 2 additional weapons outside of their main weapon. This also means that you can use guns in your reserve against the undead agent to get your equipment back. WayForward felt that this would help to keep this aspect of the game challenging but fair. The 2-weapon system also requires the player to make decisions to figure out what's best for each situation. Death would force the player into a vulnerable state by losing items while also allowing for a moment of satisfaction when you get them back. For the visuals, WayForward had a long history with developing a pixel visual style. This was seen with many of their Game Boy Advance titles. For The Mummy Demastered, the developers wanted this game to both feel and look like something that could exist on the SNES or Game Boy Advance. The executive management at Universal were big fans of this idea and did not object to this creative decision. The Mummy would take on the Gothic architecture seen in the film, while expanding on areas and even featuring enemies specific to the game. Many of the enemies took on the framework of classic Castlevania and Metroid foes. The idea was to combine elements from their inspirations to create something that pays tribute to the very best of the genre, and making something completely new at the same time. This was even seen in the level design. The developers felt that Castlevania is an easy game to get lost in, whereas Metroid does a good job of pathing the game for the player, and The Mummy would incorporate a mix of both of these styles. During the developmental process, many games see changes, tweaks, and even cutting certain areas. The Mummy Demastered had a fair share of this going on in its own development. For one, the death mechanic was changed and tweaked for the better. While WayForward was very interested in this mechanic, its first iteration resulted in an unfair implementation. Initially, when an agent died, the undead agent would be placed in the exact spot that the player died in, along with having the full power when it comes to the player's health upgrades. During playtesting, WayForward found that undead agents were nearly impossible to kill. This resulted in the developers reducing the undead agents' health along with better placement of them. Death was not intended to be cheap, but rather feed into the game's identity of being challenging and rewarding. Originally, The Mummy had more levels and areas. The final game is about 75% of the original size. What ended up being cut was anything that could be seen as filler. WayForward wanted a game that was compact and dense with content, not something that was artificially extended for the length. They believed artificially extending the game creates bloat and does not respect the player's time. An example of this is that the London Streets area was meant to be a lot longer, but during playtesting it was found to be tedious, and shrinking the area created a better experience. Now, at the same time, one of the most impressive areas in the game, the clock tower, was almost cut from the final game. The developers were able to get the license for Sofia Boutella's likeness, but they were not able to get Russell Crowe's. He played Dr. Jekyll in the film, and in the game acts as your direct connection to the home base. So Jekyll's face is actually modeled after one of the developers. Early in development, WayForward was going to feature monsters and enemies that were not seen in the Mummy film, but they would fit in nicely into the dark universe. One such inclusion was to feature Dracula and his many wives. The wives would act calm and then go berserk when they saw the player. Sadly, Universal management wanted WayForward to keep the monsters more in line with the ones inspired from the Mummy film itself. Originally, this game was meant to be released alongside the film. Midway through development, WayForward took a hard look at their own game and opted to delay it to make an end product that they would be proud of. The developers had a good relationship with the management at Universal, and everyone was on board to delay the release of the game for a few months. In October 2017, The Mummy Demastered was released to the world. The Mummy Demastered is a great example of using the license from a bad movie to make a very good game. It acts as a wonderful hidden gem that no one would expect to be good on the surface level, but once you found out who was behind the project, you knew it was going to be something special. WayForward is a reliable developer who consistently provides quality with each of their projects. The Mummy takes the template made popular by the Metroid series and crafts an experience that would fit in nicely with Nintendo's series of games. Everything here is stellar, from the minute-to-minute action, pacing, boss fights, exploration, and addictive progression. From a presentation standpoint, the visuals capture the SNES style with a killer soundtrack. This is a fantastic game. The Mummy Demastered mixes constant action with rewarding exploration. At the start, you can shoot, jump, roll, and as you continue your journey, your moveset will grow as well. This ranges from enhancements like being able to run faster, allowing you to get to new areas, or being able to jump a lot higher. Early on, you will gain the ability to climb on the ceiling, getting to hard to reach paths, along with allowing you to shoot from safety. When it comes to the action, it's really good, with high quality sound and impact from your shots. Keeping the minute-to-minute action varied are the vast amount of different enemies that you fight. You have flying foes, infinite respawning zombies, ranged enemies, and some that are really unique, like flaming heads that when you kill them they send out fireballs that you need to dodge. Each of the new areas in the game add a few more enemies to keep the player on their toes. You start out with an SMG with infinite rounds. This is your baseline weapon and you will find a few others. The shotgun is decent for short range combat. The assault rifle provides you more firepower at range, with more interesting weapons like the harpoon gun that can penetrate multiple foes. And one of my favorites is the flamethrower, as it uses up ammo very quickly but does a lot of damage in a short period of time. You have a few throwables like different grenades and C4 explosives as well. The Mummy Demastered is Metroid in everything but name. While the action is consistently very good, what greatly contributes to the addictive progression, pacing, and gameplay flow is the exploration. As you progress throughout the campaign, you will earn new items like grenades and C4 that you can use to open up new doors, or new abilities to access hard to reach or hidden areas. One of the most engaging things is finding a new item or ability, accessing new areas along with backtracking to prior ones to be able to find new items that you couldn't get to before. And on top of this, it's all done through player-initiated exploration. The game never says, hey, you remember those wooden walls that you couldn't blow up before. Instead, the game presents you with new items and what they can do, and then leaves it up to the player to put two and two together. The end result of this exploration always nets something very useful to the player, whether it is a map that shows your current area, increases your health, or the amount of ammo that you have, along with abilities that can be missed, like ones that help you do more damage. In some situations, you may know where you need to go for an additional room, but you might need to experiment on how to actually get there or overcome an obstacle. For example, there is an area where you need to run really fast and jump at the right time while also dodging a few enemies to get to a hard to reach room that gives you a damage bonus. This is really tough and can even be a bit annoying, but it is extremely rewarding to succeed when you do it. The same goes for how the environments were designed to allow the player interesting options when traversing. Honestly, opening up the map and finding new secrets is a large majority of where this game's fun comes from. Plus, just like in prior Metroid titles, the Mummy invites you to play the game again and do it more efficiently, as you understand the mechanics better and how your toolset is used. Like I mentioned before, the minute-to-minute action is really good, and the true standouts to the high action moments are the boss fights. The first is a big spider that spawns smaller enemies, sending falling rocks at you and acid blasts. Each of these fights have their own ins and outs that make them really unique. For example, there is a dragon that will continually push you back as the walls are destroyed. The scarab in the clock tower has you contending with a boss and dodging spikes. Each boss has a set of attacks and patterns for you to learn. Some might seem very hard at first, but once you pick up their moves, they become become more manageable. One unique mechanic to the Mummy is the dead agent system. Essentially, if you die, you will lose whatever weapons you had, and you need to kill your undead self again to gain them back. I like this mechanic since it puts some weight and consequence on death itself. Your decisions and gameplay are more thought out because you do not want to deal with losing those items. There's a nice selection of weapons to use, and the game allows for some fun personalization as you select which 2 additional ones you want to use. The customization is not as high as in an RPG, but what is here is appreciated. When it comes to the flaws, I honestly only had 2. If you need to refight a boss, you need to sit through the dialogue that goes on during the cutscene. Thankfully these are short, but at least on the PS4 I couldn't skip them. And lastly, there are a few enemies that have some cheap attacks and honestly are annoying to deal with. Before we move to the conclusion, I must mention the soundtrack. This is one of those rare cases where each track is at a minimum very good. There are so many memorable tunes and all greatly improve the presentation. Here are a few tracks from the game. The Mummy Demastered is an exceptional indie and is easily one of the more underrated Metroidvanias. Any fan can see where the developers' inspirations were coming from for this title, and the talent comes from how they took the blueprint from some of the greats and made something unique and special. This is one of those rare instances where the movie tie-in game is considerably better than the film. The developers expertly understand what makes Metroidvania games so special, and this is seen in every area of the game. While it seems that most people who played this enjoyed it, I do think it still deserves more attention. It is easily one of the best examples of its genre in recent years. I highly recommend The Mummy Demastered. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.